Yet another example of the BBC publishing a story apparently without checking anything about the story itself, and then a couple days later, or the day off, or a week, depending on which story it is, taking it back saying, oh, whoops, sorry, 150 million people or so, or 15 million people specifically with the X post might have seen it, but now we take it back, so everything is okay. Sorry for not checking it, and then we'll go do the same thing. This is something that BBC has been doing again and again, and despite as somebody not wanting to say that media is lying, at this point, I think BBC has a certain amount of agenda that they simply are going for, and they do not care for any kind of objectivity or even perceived objectivity. Today we'll cover another story from BBC, and we'll also give people reminder from the past and talk about these general actions that are coming out of BBC. Welcome to the reality show. Joining me today are Michael Kaufman, Marco, and Richard. And I'll go to you, Marco, first, but I'll just quickly bring up this story. So what this was about is there was a woman from Gaza that was basically was allowed to go into Italian hospital, but she died there, and the way BBC reported this is she died from malnutrition, or the sort of the famine, or the basically the lack of food was the reason why she died, and of course didn't report on the fact that she had leukemia, she had cancer. Marco, any first thoughts on this?
Yeah, well, the BBC doesn't care about reporting real facts when it comes to Gaza. Unlike the thumbnail to this program suggests, the BBC doesn't lie. The BBC deliberately misleads on certain topics that are particularly close to the BBC staff. Let's remind people that the BBC is made of about 222,000 people across the UK. Half of them are based in London. In London, there is the center of the news. I think the largest live broadcasting studio on the planet, I think it is. And together, in a few yards from Oxford Circus, all these institutions related to news are gathered together. So you have all the radios, you have BBC News, you have BBC Arabic, BBC Persian. So, here from central London, a bunch of lefties are broadcasting Hamas news throughout the world. And they hide behind this veneer of perceived objectivity, which comes from years of broadcast. The BBC started broadcasting in 1913 or 22, something like that. So it was fairly... it's got a reputation across the world for good content and broadcasting. However, these activists just exploit and hijack the perception that comes with the name of the BBC, and just broadcast and do whatever they want. Only a few weeks ago, there was revealed that an email going around from the editorial team was suggesting, do not make keep carrying the narrative that there is famine in Palestine. Ignore the fact that Israel is providing aid, because the stream of news has to be on the side of famine. We have to show there is famine and ignore everything else. And this is exactly one of those implementation of those directives, which shows somebody who's sick, who's got nothing else to do with famine, but they're presented as a victim of famine. By the way, if you at all know about Italian healthcare, socialized healthcare, it's not unusual to die anyway, whether you're a victim of famine, or you got leukemia, or you're perfectly healthy. You're gonna die if you get in there. So this is another excuse for the BBC to present their narrative, and their narrative is always invariably anti-Israel.
Oh yeah, I just checked. I'm I actually didn't know that Italy also has a universal single payer system, but yeah, I just looked it up and apparently it
That's
does.
Europe, isn't it? The whole of Europe has got one
Well,
form or the other.
universal single payer are relatively rare even in Europe. Most countries do just have universal insurance program, but the hospitals themselves, like
Well,
in Slovakia, the biggest hospitals are private.
I think France, I think it got up to 30% contribution. Italy is something 20 or 10% contribution, but generally across Europe is taxpayer funded.
And I mean, Marco mentioned in the course of that a great number of people who work for the BBC. Just as a quick aside, the great number of people who work for the National Health Service in the UK is second only to the number that work for the Chinese army, and that is a fact. Which goes to show how inefficient it is and how expensive. Anyway,
And evil.
Andy, yes, absolutely. So yeah, the BBC, I mean, this particular story and even this particular topic with the BBC is really just a symptom of what's wrong with them. I mean, frankly, the BBC used to be one of the pillars of one of the establishment pillars that held up Britain's sense of self and self-worth and sort of represented the Britain to itself and to the rest of the world, and that's long since been crumbling in all sorts of areas. Now it feels like one of those Greek pillars that's really laying on its side, quite honestly. Although we're still paying for it, or at least most people are. Because it's funded by what is essentially a BBC tax. They don't call it a tax; they call it a license fee. You don't. You have to pay it if you watch any live content from any channel, even non-BBC channels, even private channels, and if you watch the iPlayer on the BBC. But you don't have to pay it if you don't do those things. If you watch only, content on demand, for example, which many people don't know and they don't like to make a big deal of. But I can recommend the organisation defund the BBC whilst we're at it. If you actually want to find out what you need to pay for and how and what's the legal requirement. But anyway, in this particular story, yes, we're talking about the fact that you've got a human interest story, as they love to focus on, and you've got a big photo, and it's being badged as if this is an example of the famine we've been talking about. And of course, that's part of the pattern lately. We've already seen the child with cerebral palsy and the skeletal frame who was all over the place. Across the media and across the BBC, of course, and being badged as another of those without mentioning at the time all of those facts about their actual state of health. And of course, it's typical for them to take this attitude. They actually. Any given day, our biggest contact with the BBC, because we choose not to watch live TV for the very reason I mentioned earlier, our biggest contact with the BBC is with their BBC website, which you don't need the license fee in order to access. And that is dominated by pictures of Gazan women and children as mainly the main story on virtually any given day of the week, wailing and crying and appealing to the camera in true Hamas propaganda style. And it's ludicrously often. And one of the telling things is when you actually look at the 10 top most viewed articles within the BBC, it's often not in there, frankly, because people have been bludgeoned to death with this imagery and this line from the BBC, so that they are either desensitized or ignoring it to some extent. But nevertheless, the BBC does keep plugging away at trying to pretend that Israel is the enemy, that Hamas have been misunderstood, and therefore the balance of this story in everybody's eyes must be adjusted by their narrative and presentation of it, because it's within their charter to inform, educate, and entertain. And inform and educate to them means to indoctrinate too often.
So some people in the chat are confused by the British spelling on apologize, so I apologize for that. But since we are the UK channel, we write it with S, not with whatever else you want to write it. To go to you, Michael, I mean, even sort of like my question is this something like this happens, it can only come from somebody who is unthinking or is actively trying to evade it. Because even try to think of it, right? Okay, we are talking about a Gazan woman who was allowed to leave Gaza to go to a hospital in another country. And why would you not think, okay, why did that happen? And if it truly was malnutrition, oh, only one woman or a few people are allowed to leave Gaza because of malnutrition? No, maybe there is something else, but they didn't wait to see for the comments of the IDF, which IDF has stated that the reason, because the only way to leave Gaza is with the approval from Israel and IDF. So it really does seem like you either are completely oblivious of what's going on, or you are trying to basically omit details.
Well, even if the person who originated the article was oblivious, and I don't believe for a second that they were ignorant or oblivious or that stupid, certainly the one or two layers of editors that had to approve this amazing production document, what could be called as fiction, would have to have gone along with it and not asked any questions. If you watch any, even if you don't know journalism, if you watch any movie about journalism, there's always multiple layers of people whose job it is to sign off and let this stuff go through. I think that's one thing that we talk about a lot on this show, which is if your eyes and ears do not confirm what you're being told, then believe your eyes and ears. And that's a central tenet of objectivism. And this is an obvious, any 30-second thought experiment around what happened here would tell you that at least you're not getting the whole story, and you're probably getting something really wrong. The second question is why somebody would have to be flown to a hospital that far away for treatment of malnutrition. I mean, frankly, any Arab country that's in the area, Egypt, Jordan, anybody around there, even Lebanon, has enough functioning medical facilities, and we wouldn't even really need a medical facility. You just need a paramedic with some training in retreatment and treatment of malnutrition. You can't just give people food, by the way. Their bodies will collapse, but you do it slowly and you do it properly, and you give them fluids along with it. Bottom line is that there's no reason they would have to go to Italy unless they were getting some kind of specialized treatment. So that's the next thing that comes up. But I think there's a bigger problem here, and that is this, and we've seen it in our American schools as well. And my kids went through a little bit of it when they were coming through public elementary and junior high and high schools, which is history by anecdote. Let's find one person that we want to tell the story and make that story into the history. For example, just to be really facetious, we could say that Otto Schindler was representative of people in Germany. Or I believe he was in Germany, wasn't he? Okay. And
Yeah.
that's why, and he saved hundreds of Jews. And therefore, frankly, the Holocaust didn't happen because most of the good Germans who weren't Nazis were saving the Jews. And this is absurd. It's a great story. It's an amazing movie. It's wonderful. And he's a hero, obviously. But that's not what happened. That was one part of what happened, but it's a very, very small part of what happened. What happened was 6 million Jews and 12 million non-Jews were exterminated in Nazi death camps. End of discussion. That's what happened. That's history. What's going on in Gaza is not famine. Any famine that's going on in Gaza, we have ample documentation. Over and over again, every single day, there's more documentation. Anybody who is without food in Gaza is only without food in Gaza because of Hamas, period. There is so much food in Gaza that there's more food in Gaza than there are in countries that are 5 times the size on a caloric basis and a food weight basis. It's absurd. So just the fact that BBC is trying to rewrite history with these anecdotal reports here and there of finding one person. By the way, there are people in America that are starving. We have documentation. If you look in Appalachia and West Virginia and other places, there are people that are that poor that are starving. There are people in inner cities in America that are starving, that are malnourished. You can find these people. There are people in 330 million people here, and they're starving. And most countries have people that are malnourished. And frankly, in Africa, there's a lot of people that are malnourished. You don't see BBC running any of those stories because that's not news. It is a disgrace what has happened to the BBC. And as you guys said, I will tell you from the American perspective, the BBC used to be considered the international news source. When you wanted news in America about the world, you didn't turn on American news because certainly before there was any cable news, we didn't hear anything about the rest of the world hardly. But you went to the BBC, and you can't anymore because what you're getting is a bunch of trash and anecdote and thoughtless, exposés, basically from the mouth of terrorists. What you don't hear on the BBC is what Syria is doing to the Druze. You don't hear a lot about what's going on in Sudan. That doesn't make the front page of the news. The fact that Israel is in the middle of one of the most remarkable and I think, frankly, idiotic and frankly self-defeating campaigns to feed its enemies. That's not brought up. What's brought up is that there are people in Gaza that are starving. And in fact, the people that have cancer are in worse shape. And that I absolutely agree with. Bottom line is it has become a fiasco. And I don't know how they think they're going to recover. And this extends to the Washington Post and to the New York Times here in America as well. Although I have to say, I think the BBC may be worse than those two.
Yeah, and just to build upon your comments on the sort of not enough food in America, I think I just looked it up because I've heard it before. 1% of American households, meaning 374,000, experience very low food security, meaning stuff like, I don't know if I'm gonna eat today. Or I haven't eaten today at all. So yeah, this is absolutely the case. But I wanted to bring this up later, but we can talk about it now. Is yeah, this focus on sort of like individual stories, because and I feel that for my side as well. Sometimes I check out some individual stories about the Ukrainian war or the Israeli war of individual soldiers, what they are experiencing, or individual Israelis. We have many of them on this channel, or individual Ukrainians. We also had those on the channel, but that's mostly what it is, simply an individual recollection of the story. It doesn't really give you any knowledge about the overall situation because of how broad this is, right? That's why we don't, whenever we deal with concepts, whenever we deal with more fundamental things, we don't just go to two people and ask them how they feel or what they are experiencing. We look at the broad picture. So again, this kind of like focusing on the individual stories is you've already made up your mind about what the problem is, and you simply go look for the individual stories and you try to appeal to people's emotions. So BBC has already decided that the goal here is to stop the war. The goal here is to stop Israel from defending itself. And let's find, we have already decided that there is a famine, and let's now look for individual stories that we can publish that sort of encapsulates that. Marco?
Yeah, I mean, this kind of argumentation is something that Ayn Rand called thinking by concrete bound issue. Effectively, you totally ignore what the context or whatever you're focusing on. You just focus on the fact that there is a woman that looks like she's starving, and then you don't analyze why does she look like she's starving, and then you run with whatever you want. Effectively, you strip the event from its own context, and you make it up just to follow your narrative. So we see lots of these things all the time. Really, the BBC has made an art of it because, as I mentioned earlier on, first of all, they have an editorial line which is pro-Hamas. Again, we see a number of times. You just need to see the output in order to work it out. So don't just take my word, just have a look at yourself and analyze what they've been writing. So everything that they do, they tend to exploit the image, which creates some feeling from the viewer, and that feeling is designed to override the thinking. So if you see somebody in bad condition, the a normal human being, their response, their emotional response would be horror and feeling bad for them, wanting to help them. But of course, it's exactly the opposite. What you're being given is it's an image that tries to override your judgment, tries to make you think, okay, the people who caused this are the bad guys, without necessarily writing it down. But you understand it anyway. So by showing all these Palestinians always, in middle rubble, and the children and the women crying, all this kind of stuff, the subliminal message, sorry, even subliminal, is the underlying message is Israel is bad. Israel is causing all the sorrow and suffering. So you should hate Israel. And that's a very, very dangerous narrative, because not only the BBC is seen by hundreds of millions of people across the globe, but the kind of message they send out are actually influencing people's action. We've seen murders in the United States, anti-Israeli murder, Jews persecuted all over the place. Here in Europe, it's becoming 1930s all over. You see pogroms, you see Jewish people attacked in the street just because they look Jewish. You see tourists not being able to go across Europe because they're going to be attacked. You see location that actually drops bookings from Jewish customers. I mean, this thing is going on to such an extent that it's become, the famous canary in a gold mine. I mean, the stuff we see now is exactly the echo of 1930s Germany. And if we keep ignoring it, what do you think is going to happen? It's just staggering how an institution like the BBC is being captured by a bunch of activists, a bunch of lefty activists living in London, of course, who carry on with their own agenda. That's why you're going to see with the pro-Hamas stuff, you're going to see pro-environmental stuff, all the trans stuff, all the kind of topics that only that people who only care about this stuff is actually non-thinking lefty who wants to impose their view of the world on everybody else. And they exploit every single system, every single institution, every single tool at their disposal, even at the risk of destroying the very tool that they're using, like the BBC, like Michael mentioned. Nobody believes the BBC anymore. It's becoming laughing stock.
There is an aspect of this that I'd really like to stress and just take a couple of minutes to explain as well, which is the fact that the BBC is based on people who are close links to academia down the last 100 years, lefty academia, as well as an activist mindset, which sees itself as an opportunity to change the world, not just report the world, but to alter the world. And because the actual income of is not dependent upon being successful in the private sector, people know that their jobs are safe regardless, because there's enough muppets out there who will pay their £174.50 a year and shell up for it, and therefore they won't have any cause to worry about the income, so they can go for the pure activism and changing the world. Now, one example I wanted to pick out, which demonstrates that it isn't just isolated cases, and it isn't just it isn't just the minor examples, it's the broader issues which the BBC has a problem with, and has a problem in terms of truth with. And one of the aspects of the BBC is its educational side. It makes sort of programs it calls bite size, for example, which are little short programs aimed at school children of various different ages to help them with their revision in a bunch of different subjects. And so the BBC makes them, and they're available on the BBC, and teachers use them within schools in the UK, for example. One particular set of these covered ideologies, covered things like communism and capitalism, for example. And let me give you a couple of flavors of just the communism, the capitalism, to give you an example of what they're doing. They do include a couple of criticisms of communism within their Communism 1, for example, but one of the things they don't mention is famine. As a criticism of communism, no mention of famine, which in the context of this story that we're looking at, where they're truffling out for examples of what they declare is famine everywhere, is particularly ironic, I think. They don't mention Mao Zedong, They don't mention Pol Pot. They don't mention this guy called Joseph Stalin. Never heard of him. They don't mention 10 millions of people killed by the ideology of communism. They do have a couple of criticisms of communism, that it had, quote, too many limits on individual freedom, some people say. And some people say that communism is, quotes, too centralized, unquote. That's it for the criticisms of communism. Compare that to capitalism and what they say about that, where they criticize it as being the capitalist class, which concentration of power, quote, this capitalist class profits from the exploitation of workers, unquote. Or capitalism seeks profit, quote, over what's best for society, sustainability, and the environment, unquote. Now, all right, there will be only a small team working on that, but there'll be another small team working on each program, and there'll be another small team working on the editorial side within each program, and they all feed off each other, they all hire each other, they all link together. So even if somebody comes into the BBC as a fresh face and genuinely honest attempt at being a journalist, they tend to gradually be corrupted by the environment they're in and the example they're set all around them. So they all end up coming into the same mold at the end of it, and then that feeds into whichever job they hop to within the BBC. So, but it's quite clear to me, you can find examples all over the place where they do know what they're doing. This is not ignorance. This is not isolated cases. It is a general trend. It doesn't mean there aren't perhaps some people who do the opposite, but the general trend is clear and hideous.
Yeah, it's nice to hear from BBC that if only communism was decentralized, it somehow makes it more okay. And we limits of individual freedom. I mean, who cares about that? If the working class is being exploited, we have to care for that. Which is that for kids? Because that's like exploitation of the working class is such a that's a complicated concept, and it's also a Marxist concept, by the way.
It is. It's for 11 to 14-year-olds. So you can get it in. They've only got to be able to repeat the phrase. They don't need to understand it. They've just got to be ready to repeat it ready for when they go to university.
But that's all right, because even adult Marxists, they just don't understand it anyway. If they understood what they're saying, they would just shoot themselves.
Well, let's. We have a few more things to bring up, but let's cover this story just a little bit more. Specifically the BBC comments. So the BBC spokesman, after this was revealed that she died or that she had leukemia, the woman that died, they've said, we were not initially aware that Mara Abuzari was being treated for leukemia. In line with usual editorial practice, we added this to the story after the Israeli authorities put the information into the public domain in what hospital has described as a very complex clinical picture. So, and we've seen this before. We've seen that, I mean, I always mention this story, but when there was that story that BBC reported of that apparently IDF dog has killed why do you always laugh when I mention this story?
It's just the Islamophobic dog. It just makes me laugh.
But basically, an IDF dog killed or reportedly killed a Palestinian boy who had both autism and Down syndrome, if I remember correctly. And this whole story that BBC reported on was simply from a recollection of the Palestinian woman, the mother of the family. That's all they had. No comment from the IDF, no comment from anything else. They published the IDF comment a bit later, but that's all they had the first time. So this is how BBC oftentimes works. They report on a story and then they say, oh, and now here is a comment from the IDF after we've already published the story. And even I'm not sure if the original story is up, but but we covered the original story. When there was the original story, the fact that IDF didn't comment on was at the bottom of the article. So you read the whole article and only until the end you even find out, oh, this whole story was simply reporting from one Palestinian woman. I mean, Michael, what kind of reporting is that?
Well, I think we're all being too nice. This would be one thing if we were talking the first time on this show about the first time that the BBC screwed up. But we all know, and let's not be wishy-washy here. Let's not give these people the benefit of the doubt. There's no doubt here, first of all. I mean, there's certainly no reasonable doubt here that this is completely planned, it's constructed, and the BBC is very well aware that first time reading of articles is what, 10 times higher than people who read on the editorial corrections. And the impressions people get and the emotions that they elicit are all determined by the first read of an article.
Yeah, and
And
just to quickly jump in, the
yeah,
corrections are oftentimes within the same article. I mean, who goes back to reread the article they've
that's what I
already read?
mean. That's what I mean. People who go read the edit, even if they label it edited. I can tell you from the scientific literature, when there's an erratum and a correction at the top, usually they're put at the top of the table of contents 3 months later in a journal. Who remembers 3 months ago what came out in the journal? And even obviously this is mostly online now, but no one's going to go back and they don't have time to go back and look at that. That was the purpose of the editorial process to begin with, was to catch this stuff, to get it right. And at least in scientific literature, for the most part, you do have errata that are put up there, and you actually have those errata are transferred across essentially all digital media, so that even articles that cite the incorrect article come out, will have an erratum attached to them. Obviously, with this kind of stuff, it's not done, but this is completely on purpose. And the world that these people, the number of ridiculous comments about all of this. I mean, I always love when people talk about society, because I've never met society. I never have. I try to get introduced to society all the time, and we talk about what's good for society. We have democratic elections that can't even decide what's good for society. What do we think? There's going to be some mystical person who's going to come down and decide what's really good for society? Because even when we're all deciding what's good for our own societies, we don't agree on it. This is a ridiculous notion. The other ridiculous notion is that people who are elected to government are actually smart. They're not smart. They're popular. Some of them are smart. Many of them are well educated. Some of them are really stupid. But none of this matters. What matters is people are entitled to their opinion if they're legal citizens. I know there's people who think illegal citizens are entitled to their opinion. I don't. I pay my taxes. I'm part of a society that believes that you're supposed to actually be a legal person to vote. And the entire thing here by the BBC is an attempt to completely undermine a government and a people in order to get through this notion that the poor terrorists are just always being trod upon by the evil Israelis.
Yeah, and to go into something different, when I was, I can't remember where exactly I saw this, but there was a BBC headline which was something like more than 60,000 people killed in Gaza during Israeli offensive. And oh, I think I was just looking up the news stories, and I used Bing because I'm a good person. I looked up the Bing news stories, and it just had this headline, right? More than 60,000 people killed in Gaza during Israeli offensive. Then if you go into the article, it says according to Hamas-run Gaza Health Ministry. But the fact is, this is what people see. How many people just see the numbers and repeat it again and again? It doesn't matter that you say, well, this is according to Hamas. One, that information doesn't even have the full context in it to describe why this number is bad. And second, you're still using that number. I mean, imagine if there was article something like Jews want to enslave humanity according to the protocols of the elders of Zion. It's like, why are you even publishing that? Like, this is like, it's a terrorist organization. It's a fake document. Why do you even bother? Or no, not why do you bother? We know why they bother. Why would you publish something like this that yourself is not true, right? Like you specify, like in some ways, I would accept it more if they simply published the number. Because if they say it's according to Gaza Health Ministry, which is run by Hamas, you're saying this is from terrorists, yet you're still publishing that. Marco?
Well, I mean, why would you want to get facts in the way of a good narrative? I mean, the reason they say we weren't aware, I mean, it's frankly inexcusable for a news agency. What do you mean you weren't aware? The very basic of presenting news is to double check your sources, your facts before you publish it. But they don't care. They're quite happy to look like they don't really know what they're doing because who cares? We've done the story. People have seen it. People have reacted to it, and people are hating Israel for it. So job done. That's all they want to do. The only purpose it is to present the facts, skew it according to a certain narrative, and then if really somebody makes a point, a valid point, bothers to make the point and point out that they made a mistake, well, they just either retract it or apologize. But by then it's too late, isn't it? People have already killed the guy who works for the embassy in DC for the Israeli embassy. What do you do? It's gone. The act is committed. The minds have been shaped towards a certain narrative. So, the, you know, it's so vicious, so incredibly, and of course, it's a kind of arrogance you can only get from a state-funded institution. The kind of people that know that whatever they do, however they screw up, however they lie and twist the facts, they're not going to be sacked. They still get paid anyway. Who's going to move them? I mean, here in Britain, we're like a Islamo-socialist republic now. Nobody will ever sack somebody from the civil servants or some job linked to the government because it's impossible. We are turning the whole job market is effectively in kind of slavery run thing. And the BBC is very clear about how to deal with certain political issues. For example, you will never find the BBC pointing out the guilt of the current government. The current government is a lefty government, a socialist government, and so they will never criticize it. Opposite, they're gonna constantly cover their back. When there is bad news, they present it in the light that, yeah, but it's not their fault, or they present stuff in a way that you don't even understand there is a problem in the first place. I mean, we have a chancellor who's been lying on her CV, pretending to be more able to do the job than what she actually do. Just look what she's doing. She's making a hatchet of the whole economy here in Britain. But she's a crook effectively. But the BBC doesn't go after her and points it out. The minister of industry or whatever pretended to be a solicitor. He's not a solicitor, but the BBC doesn't go after him. They cover each other all the time because that's the kind of view of the world that they have. They are a bunch of socialists who love socialism because their job is funded by us, by taxpayers. But if they had to live on the kind of reputation that comes from the job they do, like a scientist publishing a paper, for example, after 2 or 3 times they publish a bunch of crap like the BBC does, nobody will ever read their papers ever again. Nobody will ever fund the research, and nobody certainly will ever employ them. But unless you got the state behind.
Yeah, absolutely, and the way in which the BBC reports on every aspect of life in the UK, particularly, it will do it through that lens of being a state-funded broadcaster that gets its income anyway. Take, for example, the fact that when the Conservative government was trying to reduce welfare payments on households with an empty spare room in their homes, the BBC chose to dub that the bedroom tax, and referred to that as the bedroom tax in virtually every report they covered on it. Reducing welfare to the BBC is a tax, as opposed to the BBC licence fee, which is actually charging people a tax, a BBC tax, which is what we ought to call it, not a BBC licence fee. I think, and the fact that, for example, during this speaks to the wider issue you're talking about. The fact that during the Glastonbury Music Festival, where half the BBC is actually at the music festival, including the higher echelons and all those that make the decisions, and yet nobody can find the kill switch on the live feed when one of the performers on the stage is inciting a crowd to chant "Death to the IDF." And of course, they want the concert to go out. That they can apologise for it later on or whatever, but for now, sorry, and that's the way they operate. Let it go out first. Let it reach as wide an audience as possible, and we'll worry about some small scale apology later on. I mean, there've been all sorts of those things. For example, one of the worst, and the fact there is a BBC Arabic is already why. Why am I paying for a BBC Arabic again? Can you explain that? But the fact there is, for example, and they are the most egregious of the lot in terms of their reporting. They've had articles, for example, indicating that, stating that Jews on the festival of Sukkot apparently spit on Christians. That was about what the article was about. And they kept that article up for 19 months before they finally apologized for the fact that it's a flagrant lie and removed it. But that's just an example of the worst kind for them. Or they did an article on the main BBC, a main piece on the BBC, all about Eid, teaching us all about Eid, of course, always. And they referred to converts to Islam, not as converts, but as reverts. Because, if according to fundamentalist Islam, we're all Muslims. And we just, so people who didn't realize that have just reverted to what they already were. And the BBC chose to include that word instead of converts to Islam, which shows the kind of people who are both writing, editing, and sourcing the articles, which they gradually drip all over the place into the minds of those who aren't paying enough attention and aren't using other sources sufficiently and aren't thinking.
Yeah, I'm surprised about the bedroom tax because usually lefties or socialists are all about means testing, right? Rich people shouldn't get anything. Everything should be means tested. Everything should just be given or sort of recognized for the people who apparently have not. But something I wanted to bring up a bit earlier and then I forgot, so I'm gonna bring it now, is the IDF and Shin Bet has announced that Hamas terrorist Kamal Salem Najjar, who raided Kibbutz Nir on October 7, has been eliminated. He is the person who kidnapped the Bibas boys, and so it's great to hear he was taken care of. We also have a comment from Yarden Bibas, the father and husband, who said, a small part of my closure happened today. Thank you to the IDF forces, Shin Bet, and everyone who took part in eliminating one of the terrorists who kidnapped me on October 7. Because of you, he will not be able to harm anyone else. Please take care of yourselves, heroes. I am waiting for closure with the return of my friends David and Ariel and the remaining 48 male and female hostages. So it's great. It's a great announcement to hear. Michael, any comments on this?
Yeah, I mean, it's remarkable that 2 years into this that we still are talking about this. If we eliminated all of Hamas, no matter how many civilians, so-called innocent civilians, and we can debate that, were killed, what would happen to the world? And for those of you that are listening that might be on the fence about objectivism or clarity on, and forget about left versus right, just think about good versus evil. It's just such an obvious story of good versus evil, and the complete disgusting and excrement is probably the best word of what's being spewed these days, helped by the BBC and to a large extent the New York Times and the Washington Post, and certainly by public broadcasting in America and by NPR, National Public Radio, both of whom are going to be severely curtailed in the coming weeks, I believe, when the budgets are cut, maybe months, but the budgets are going to be cut substantially. And how is the world going to get better if we continue to even a little bit support these people who just want to kidnap and annihilate other people? And there is zero discussion that should be being had in defense of any of these groups. The fact that we have countries that are supporting a Palestinian state of what? Of terrorism? They've had 20 years to make a Palestinian state. All they've done is make Gaza into a military camp, and the West Bank is still a disaster in the Arab regions that are overseen by the Palestinian Authority. The only places that are really flourishing are the Israeli parts of the West Bank. So the bottom line is that this is really not a discussion. One thing I did want to mention early on is I think Israel comes into these discussions in the wrong way. I often said this. We answering the question down here, and we should take a step back. And every counter to one of these articles should start with Israel is fighting a war that was started by Gaza, by Hamas. 80+% of Gazans supported Hamas in the annihilation of Israel. The charter for Hamas is the annihilation of Israel. For reasons that are unclear, Israel continues to provide humanitarian aid to all of Gaza, including Hamas. Now we can go into starving. And obviously it could go on and on. But my point is that Israel likes to jump into the middle and answer the question, which is like, when did you stop beating your wife question, instead of basically providing any sort of, wait a minute, we're the only country stupid enough to be giving aid to the people that want to murder us, whose charter says to annihilate Israel. And I did want to bring that up because it's back to the whole mantra and the whole way that Israel and much of the West, when they do try to counter these narratives, we jump in the middle and we answer the question, when do I stop beating my wife? And that question in and of itself is a violation and has no good answer on purpose. Please don't think that these highly educated, despicable people that are at the BBC and other places, don't think they're naive enough to not understand what they're doing. They understand exactly what they're doing. Their job is to take words and create, as George Orwell said, doublespeak. This is all highly choreographed bullshit. And it's evil, and it will only lead to a worse society. And what's ironic here, it will lead to a society which will first annihilate the journalists as soon as they disagree with whatever's being said by the autocrats.
Well, first, something that I thought was sort of miswritten by Ynet, where I saw the story, but now I actually see an IDF picture, and it's true. The full name of this terrorist is Jihad Kamal Salem Najjar. So there you go. We also have a super chat from Bulmus. Thank you so much. He says, I met Yarden at his family's Shiva. It was brutal to see him in that state after all he went through. I looked it up, and I believe Shiva is like a 7-day mourning period in sort of like Jewish culture. Marco, any thoughts on this?
Well, I mean, going back to the BBC misrepresentation of what happened with that woman, I'd like to draw people attention how women in the Gazans world, in the Palestinian world, are used. I mean, in Muslim culture, women are effectively subhumans. They're just servants. They're second-class citizens. They're not even considered as you know we like to do here as equals. But when it comes to being victims, you have women splattered all over the place. You only see and hear from blah 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 blah. They never tell you that actually women take also part to the jihad. Sinwar had a wife, at least one. She was seen last time waddling through a tunnel with a very expensive handbag, clearly stolen from the money that the international community has given to Hamas throughout the last 20 years. So just see and focus on women as victims is very misleading. We're talking about a society here which, despite treating women like second-class citizens, still use them as weaponry or use them as a way of fighting the propaganda war. And they will not stop with using children and women as hostages, as shield, human shields, when they place them in hospitals, schools, and civilian venues. So we are talking here about a highly sophisticated and evil structure. When people talk about the Palestinian state, well, we had the Palestinian state for the last 20 years. Gaza was in the hand of the Palestinians. And what did they do? They dug tunnels, they created a war machine to destroy Israel. So that's the Palestinian state that you are effectively condoning by talking about the Palestinian state, by supporting the Palestinian cause, and by giving money to these monsters. Nothing less than destruction of this kind of culture, the culture that fosters the hate, the racist hate that we've seen for the last 80 years at least. I mean, under this kind of guise, this kind of hate has always been there. Jews have historically been hated by many cultures. But this kind of hate that we've seen from the last 80 years, focused directly on Jews and the state of Israel, is just intolerable. Why do we tolerate this kind of stuff? Imagine if the Muslims were at the receiving end. People would be up in arms. You can't even say anything nowadays without offending a Muslim somewhere. However, it's fine to chase and attack Jews. This is all backwards. This is all not only backwards, but deliberately misleading. Again, talking about the Bibas, I mean, that's one of the most terrifying stories that happened in the last 2 years. I mean, the two kids, one 4 years old, the other one 9 months old, were actually killed by terrorists. They weren't shot. They didn't die in an accident. They were murdered bare hand by the terrorists. And then they disfigured the bodies, making it look like they died under an IDF attack. I mean, this is the definition of pure evil. And all the morons, they go out and chant Free Gaza and all this kind of crap, all the flag waving for Palestinian flags and crap like that, is ignoring the fact that these monsters are still out there, are still holding hostages. They've killed over 1,000 people on October the 7th, and they're still killing people. Give them an inch, well, they'll take the inch, they'll take the arm, and in the end, they'll do this again. They vow to do this again. It's not a matter of a conventional war. This is an evil culture. As Michael said, this is civilization material. This is Israel holding up the last light of civilization in the Middle East. And we are here in the West trying to spread this kind of hate and disgusting evil that comes from that culture. It's just ridiculous that we're still here considering things like the BBC and this kind of propaganda even believable. We should be laughing at them and, deal with them in a decisive way by pointing out they are the evil, we are the civilized one.
And in the course of the coverage by the BBC since October the 7th, and for the period when the fate of the Bibas family was not known, not entirely known, whether they were still alive or not, as they were held in captivity, the BBC chose to really minimise their coverage of them. I mean, if you compare that with how they choose to home in on a particular, such as in this case of this, the child with cerebral palsy, for example, and misrepresent what is going on there, how they choose to focus in on individual children within Gaza, but they actually had individual children in the case of Israeli children taken in the most upsetting manner, and they chose to literally minimize the coverage. They do the absolute minimum possible in terms of referring to it. And obviously to hear the guy, responsible for it, or one of those responsible for it, bear in mind the complicity of the Palestinian people in this, as well as Hamas, It's great to hear of a terrorist eliminated. Bear in mind, immediately after October the 7th, I don't know. I can't say whether it's changed entirely since then, but certainly in the days and weeks after October the 7th, the BBC wouldn't refer to the perpetrators of October the 7th as terrorists. They would only call them militants. And that's at the height of outrage as to what had happened on October the 7th. And therefore their colours were on full display from day one, and frankly, with anyone with eyes, prior to October the 7th anyway. So it all fits within that context. But that is how it is, unfortunately, and only by people withdrawing their funding of the BBC are we ever likely to get a change to it. Because the BBC actually operates on a 10-year renewable royal charter. It's due for renewal at the end of 2027. It's all negotiating heavily with the government at this stage, with only a couple of year and a half to go. So I'm sure its license fee is safe, or certainly its income is safe. And what's most likely to happen, even if that license fee is ended, is it'll be taken from direct taxation by one form or another. There is no threat to the BBC. Everybody who works there knows it, and thus, they double down.
We have a super chat from Bulmuz. Thank you so much. He says, I think today propaganda might be the most crucial target in war, maybe except for combat targets. I think Israel has definitely failed the propaganda war. Now, there's two ways you fight it, domestic and with the enemies. You have to show the Palestinians that they are losing, which they are not feeling, and you have to show to your own people that you're winning and your goal is to win, which I think Israel has failed at both. Michael, any last thoughts from you, and where can people find you?
I think Marco and Richard said it really well. I think we should not speak in possibles and giving people benefits of the doubt. We need to start speaking definitively that the BBC is part of the evil goal to destroy Western civilization, and we don't need to determine why. I don't think any of what we've learned about why mass killers kill people have reduced the number of mass killers. And I don't know that we've really learned why each mass killer does it. They each probably have their own reasons, genetics, environment, the combination, whatever. At some point, who cares? The actions speak the loudest, and those are what matter. It doesn't matter why. We need to call these people out. We need to start electing people that stand up to this crap and start to respect where we came from as a successful set of successful societies, and how do we continue to populate those successes instead of pretending that going back to some kind of medieval culture is going to make anything better for anyone. Michael Kaufman, 2Fs on LinkedIn. Thanks.
Michael might have to leave, so if you do need to run, you can. But Marco, any last thoughts from you, and where can people find you?
Yes, the BBC finds itself in a comfortable position in bed with this kind of monsters, because ultimately they want the same thing. They want total power, totalitarianism. That's what they're after, and they I think the BBC specifically had a bit of taste of this power during the COVID pandemic period, where everybody was locked in and they were the voice of the reason, telling you how to behave, this kind of stuff, and demanding compliance from everyone. They saw a little glimpse into what they think is their future. They see themselves as the anointed ones, those have to be in the position of power because it's them. They think they're going to be part of the elite. So they see the kind of Islamic world, this kind of totalitarian ideas that the caliphate want to dominate the world, and they kind of like the environment. They something chimes with them, and that's why they behave in this totally evil way, by supporting what they're going to be eventually the enemies, because an Islamic culture is not going to stop in front of the BBC. It's going to take over the BBC and turn it into some Islamic propaganda machine. But hey, they don't see this, and it's up to us to stop them. It's up to us to point out actually you're wrong, and the kind of they don't provide any other vision of the world apart from Israel is bad, these guys are good, you should support them. You shouldn't support the Palestinians because the Palestinians are on the side of the medieval culture that will end up in slavery. You do not support the Palestinians because you do not want to support a totalitarian state. You want to be on the side of individual rights, protection of individual rights, and freedom, which is exactly the right that Israel is on. As imperfect a state as it is, it's still the only one in the Middle East. So don't go for what the BBC says. Go for what's the bright light out there, what's a good future, what's the option that gives you freedom and individual rights.
I think to sum up for me, in some ways the BBC is unique, and in some ways it's just typical across the world of different broadcasters in different countries in terms of how it peddles its propaganda and tries to pull the wool over people's eyes. I think the ripple effect of an organization as big as the BBC and its nature of reporting, such that it'll be cited or frankly copied without citation in all sorts of articles, in all sorts of newspapers and media outlets in many different countries right across the world. They will consider the BBC as being the source. And the fact that it's got those three letters at the front of that source as being that's already been checked, I don't need to bother. So often you're not seeing a secondary source. You're just seeing a repetition of the first, and the first is the one that most needs to be questioned. I think it's just up to each of us, isn't it, to corroborate what you're looking at wherever you can, to think about the fundamentals, to think about the principles, to think about what just doesn't fit, and to pursue certain lines when you can see a gaping hole in a particular story or an argument, and just to remain alert and awake when it comes to the input which you imbibe and watch and see. So I think that's the crucial thing. And it's about objective fact ultimately, isn't it? It's about keeping connected to reality and not letting the messengers that stand between you and reality decide what reality is when you can see evidence that that's not the case. So, I mean, in terms of checking out some of the other work we've done, please look at the Briefly Objective, links in the description below, short form material that really get to the heart of each of the issues which we cover in many of these shows.
And for something a bit more positive, people can check out the Irreplaceable Spark conference. Simply visit objectivism.co.uk to find out more. It's a conference Ayn Rand Centre UK is organizing later this year, October 25th and 26th in Orange County, California. It's a weekend conference, so you can still work and come in and enjoy, I think, a lot of great talks where you'll be able to hear from successful people that used objectivism towards their success. And we've also recently started the Sunday Spark, where we had Michael Kaufman, who had to leave, on for the first show. So you can also check out that. You'll be able to hear from a lot of people that will be at the conference. So make sure to check out that as well. Thank you guys for joining me today. Thank you everybody for watching, and we'll be back tomorrow with another episode of the Daily Objective and the reality show. Until then, bye-bye.
Bye.